Right, morning. Welcome everybody. Monday morning, Easter Monday morning. And today we are talking about data, I think. So get your tricky hats on and we'll talk about commander data. No, not that data. We're talking about how much reliance you put on data when you make your decisions and perhaps who do you follow that's maybe not too well known. So those were the two convoluted questions that we came up with on Friday, both of which completely confused me. So I decided to go back to my roots and I'm going to stick to Star Trek. So the rest of you can go whichever direction you want. But live long and prosper and we'll take it from there. So all jokes aside. So data and decisions and who do you follow? So, being an analytical, I hate data and I don't follow anybody. So that's the end of my input for the morning. So yeah, Trevor, we better go with you because I think this was all came from you and telling us to watch some or other arbitrary fellow on a YouTube clip that totally put me to sleep. And yeah, need to know why you follow this guy.
Right. Yeah, I almost fell off my chair when I heard both you and Ed turn around and say, how can you follow people that extrapolate data? And I'm turning around and saying, how can you not? So when you have this amazing correlation of years and years and years of data, and the correlation allows a guy like Ray Kurzweil, I believe the Aussies call him. I call him Kurzweil. We better talk to him and find out who he is. But as the futurist and strategist for Google, I tend to like to follow individuals who tend to be the trendsetters in global terms. So anyone who's a strategist for someone like or an enterprise like Google, I'm keen to hear about him. But how I got to hear about Kurzweil was through Peter Diamandis. Peter Diamandis and Kurzweil came up with this concept of Singularity University. And so they were talking. I like to follow people who were talking really out there beyond the comprehension of most other people. And to actually grab onto what is it that they can see that the average Joes cannot see. And these guys, I think Kurzweil has predicted the singularity event when robots and automation and all that starts performing equally as well, if not better than human beings. And they can actually become independent thinkers. This will get Ed going. In 2048. That was the target date that he actually put there, I believe, for that particular event. I tend to remember there was a date that he set up as 2029 as well, but I can't remember exactly what that event was. I've had so much data coming in that I'm discombobulated, as someone actually said before. But, I remember, and this might be of interest to individuals, some 50 odd years when I was into all of these books, one of the tricks that I used to do when opening up a book and being really taken by individuals, and the type of individuals I was taken up with in those early days were people like Anthony Robbins, Paul Pulzer. These were top thinkers in their particular fields, and they were rated highly by individuals. But it wasn't really their thinking that I was going on. I was interested in who they referenced as individuals that they studied. And then I went back and had a look at those individuals that they studied, which is quite interesting because you can see how they actually build their future thoughts on past thinkers. So I went into the reference material to each of these books. And in those days, I mean, the supplying of references was really, it was spot on. I don't know that it's that spot on in the type of data that we get today, apart from maybe things like Wikipedia, who put in great links. And so today I have a look at who these people talk to, who they rate. So I'm watching people like, I love Gary Vaynerchuk because he was doing things in social media that I actually couldn't understand at all. So I keep watching him. I love this guy, Max Kaiser, because he upsets the powers that be in the financial world, and he's on Russia TV. So we in South Africa can actually upset all the Americans who think the Russians are all communists. The Russians and Ed are all communists, and they all own Animal Farm. And so I like people like this who are controversial, but when they say something and they do something, something big happens. So they're actually able to talk from a point of either success or making things happen that I admire. So let's see, who have I given you? Peter Diamandis, Ray Kurzweil. I think most individuals in the world, I think Ray Dalio is another one that we've got to follow in the investment community. There's a young lady by the name of White, I can't recall her name, Cheryl White, but you'll get her link through Max Kaiser. She seems to be holding the investing world together in a big way. And she's talking about the importance of nanotechnology and AI and what's going to happen in the world of climate change. I'll actually go and get her details for you and put them in the chat facility. Ed, you've got to go and have a look at that. So that's just some of my inputs.
Okay, so I've got data overload. So filter all that out and find somebody who can maybe put it into perspective. Ed, can you put any of that into perspective?
Well, I hope so. I think the first thing, I'm not a communist, I'm a socialist. I found that guy Kurzweil, at best he's blinkered, at worst he's dangerous. And for me, and I didn't manage to listen to all of it. It just bored the pants off me. And I think you can make anything correlate if you choose the right scale and the right data and manipulate it in the right way. And there's a wonderful website, I meant to look it up, but I didn't get around to it, that has loads and loads of graphs that match certain things to other things. So it might be, I don't know, the pork bellies future market, the graph for that matched with the number of goals scored in the English Premier League. And if you play with data enough, you can say anything with it. When I was working in financial services, there was one phrase you had to keep putting on all your stuff that you put out. Past performance is no guide to future performance. And that's particularly so when you have a paradigm shift, isn't it? You know, if you extrapolated the sales of, I don't know, vinyl records, they were going magic until some idiot went and invented the cassette tape, and then someone invented a CD. And so, you know, and you look at the sale of box sets of, you know, real live box sets of DVDs. Do they exist anymore because someone invented streaming? And I thought his claims about him being 89% accurate, what a load of tosh. Because if you actually looked at some of his claims, they were so broad that you could make them fit anything. So I was not impressed. And the one thing that really destroyed it for me was when he took a drink, because he was drinking from a single-use plastic bottle. And nowhere was there any data about how full the ocean's becoming with plastic and how polluted fish and the rest of the food chain is becoming with plastic, and how that will impact on human health. And some of the figures he was using was so aggregated around wealth, around health, etc., that I think they were meaningless, because you need to have that granularity to understand them. So that was that. I was not impressed. I was going to say something a little bit disrespectful, but I won't. But some of it was interesting. But to me, he just bored the pants off me. When I want to know something now, and it's great, isn't it? I turn to the internet. And there's all sorts of stuff on the internet, isn't there? Absolutely loads of stuff. And then I do my research. And one of my favorite tools is a thing called Google Scholar. I don't know whether you guys know Google Scholar, but it's a search engine specifically for published scientific research. And it can be on anything from macrobiology to space to history. Any published academic work you can find through Google Scholar. So if someone says eating bacon reduces your life expectancy by 3 minutes a slice, I can go on Google Scholar, find out where that research came from, and find out how robust that research is. And if you understand how, oh yeah, great, yeah, that's it, brilliant. If you understand what type of research it is, you can then decide how robust it is. And the way science is structured, and the way that academics have to make a living, dictates they tend to do less robust research than is necessary, because it's a great way to get published. Do a small piece of research that shows something exciting, and then you get published. Do a large piece of research that shows something pretty normal, then it doesn't get published. So Google Scholar is my go-to place. And then I don't follow anyone, because you then become a clone, really, don't you? But I do listen to what people say, and then I check it out. And I'll give you an example. I was listening to someone talking about diversity in the workplace, and they were saying that a study in the Harvard Business Review showed that diversity in the companies that had diverse workforces had better performance. Oh, well, that's quite interesting. And I was going to use that in something I was going to do. So I looked up the article in the Harvard Business Review, and it didn't actually say that. It said companies that had leaders that embraced the benefits of diversity did better, which is an entirely different thing. And I think unless you get to the actual words, they can be sort of mangled a bit, because that means you can have companies with diverse workforces that don't perform well because the leader doesn't believe in it. And then the other thing I turn to when I want inspiration or a steer on something are poets, because poets write about people, and all stuff comes down to the end to people. So, I think we all know the Kipling's 6 honest serving men. What and why and when and how and where and who? I ask those questions. And I go off on other poets as well. I think John Donne's got a great poem, "Rich men trust not in wealth, gold cannot buy your health," which I always think is quite interesting. And then to show how weird management consultants are and gurus are, there is a whole industry, and even the Harvard Business School even do it, around using Shakespeare or Shakespeare's plays to teach business principles and business philosophies. And of course, Shakespeare was writing fiction. It wasn't real life. These things didn't happen. He made them up. He might have based them on a little bit of history, but he made them up. And also, yes, the Jabberwocky. I actually wrote a poem based on the Jabberwocky structure, but that's a different story. Yeah, so Shakespeare was writing about fiction, but he was also writing about kings and queens and an entirely different power structure than exists in a business. And yet these so-called gurus use some of that stuff to pump out crap that we listen to. There is one bit in Shakespeare I really like, and that's the speech in Julius Caesar between Brutus and Mark Antony. And I think it's a great way in showing, you know, the whole debate about who speaks first. And it's also about how to really rubbish someone without rubbishing someone, because Mark Antony keeps saying, but Brutus was an honourable man, but all the time he's having a go at him. And that speech changes the whole thing. But again, that's fiction. Okay, it's Shakespeare observing people and putting his spin on it, but it's fiction. So I don't follow anyone. I just research stuff. And if it fits in with Animal Farm, I'm with it. Oh, no, sorry. That was just for Trevor's thing. But yeah, if you don't use Google Scholar is an excellent thing, but you really need to also understand the type of research that was being done, because very often something might correlate, but there's no causation. It might be a small sample. It might be an observational study rather than a study in the lab, etc. And what happens in the lab doesn't translate to the outside world. So yeah, and if you don't think stuff is about people, you can invent the best mousetrap in the world and people will not beat a path to your door. You need to market it, and that involves people. So that's me.
Great, thanks, Ed. Yeah, perhaps some sanity in the madness. I'm not sure. So, Jasper, can you make any sense of what's been discussed so far?
No, and I don't think any of us can make sense of another person's paradigm or world that they live in, because it's been shaped for a reason over many, many years and many influences by many people. And I can certainly see aspects of correlate, you know, with that ridiculous correlations of that you showed us there, Ivan, you know, trying to correlate the use of margarine with divorces and stuff like that. I think there's enough in each and every one of us that we can correlate. We can get a glimpse of, yes, I agree with that part of your life because it's true for my life as well. And I think, you know, when I listen to Ed, I can see correlations. When I listen to Trevor, I can see correlations. But actually, my life is totally different. But I have certainly gone through the phase that Trevor talked about as a young man, when I was made aware of the lives that has been lived before me and different ways of thinking in the world. And when I started to read many of the same books that Trevor read, I also found it very valuable to see what influenced them to get to that point of reference, and then research the researchers and go right back, you know, and I think in the end, so it's almost like you're a sponge. You absorb all these influences, and you can't take it in fast enough. And at one stage, you know, I was really reading vociferously on a daily basis. But now I'm not reading that much, and certainly not the old books. And what I do find interesting is that you know, you can absorb so much of the only so much of the past, but what about the future? And then I'm starting to be exposed to new people on the block, new writers who are now exploring the new economy and getting glimpses of understanding, and then put that glimpse of understanding in a book. And I get offered some of these books to read. Now, I'm reading much slower nowadays, and I haven't really gone through most of the stuff that's on my shelf to read. But so I think it's almost what do you call it, a stages that we go through, that new people will come and go through the same discovery that we do, and then get to a point where they almost don't care anymore. But it's not that you don't care. Also, like Trevor has mentioned there, from Peter Diamandis and Ray Kurzweil, I've also discovered through Diamandis an independent, well, I don't know if it was through stuff that we started to send around, but I do appreciate these kind of people who are now the new gurus, exploring this new world and trying to make sense of this new world. But I'm also, and I find, things like, what is it, the environmentalists. Some of it I find interesting because of, for uses of plastic and how do we get plastic out of the system and stuff like that. But I don't think we're going to be without plastic soon. They'll just find new ways of making sure it doesn't pollute. But then in all these other cases, I only read up to a certain point, and then I tend to lose interest, and I'm asking myself, but why? And I think it's because one get to a point in your life, and this is certainly where I am now, that I'm happy that there are the Diamandises and these other people who are exploring the future in robotics and nanotechnology and all the very interesting stuff. And I like also specifically Peter Diamandis with a heavy positive message to say things has never been better, it's becoming cheaper, etc., etc. But I'm trying to read between the lines of where's society going and where do I need to position myself and my family, and also what's my own personal mandate on this world for the little time that I have left, so that I can not necessarily make the impact and become one of the big names, but it's certainly, whatever I've been sent to do, have I delivered and have I finished? And I'm trying to think in the minds of people who came up with breakthroughs, the Einsteins of this world, the inventors of this world. The breakthroughs there did come from collating the data to know what did not work, but they still couldn't figure it out what worked until for many of them it came in their imagination. Like Einstein could imagine taking a ride on a ray of light and imagining the world around him. And for another guy, I think the guy who invented light bulbs, what was it? Things almost come into a dream. To think of how you should combine things, and the story of Carter with his peanuts, the various combinations. So I'm starting to be very fascinated by the world of dreams and imagination, and it's almost the spiritual side of things. Is to say, all right, out of all of these things that I get bombarded with, what do I need to hear? So it's almost filter out the noise, filter out the clutter, and just try and think internally. So that's where the real breakthroughs come. And then in hindsight, science and data will then confirm that you were on the right path. So I think we're all influenced. I don't follow anyone, but we're all influenced. And if I find something interesting, I'll make sure I'm on their blogs and things to read through it. And there's a saying, people are there for a season or a reason or a lifetime. And I think we all have it constantly in our lives. Who is there for a season, who's there for a reason, and who's there for a lifetime. And I think the challenge with trying to be too dogmatic by analytics only is every now and then something happen and you get a reset and a monetary system crash. And then all the data that pertain to that monetary system is no longer valid. What we do see, however, is human behavior tend to keep repeating itself through history. So it would be more interesting to say, how do I read the data to make sense out of everything?
Great, thanks, Jasper. Yeah, some great points there. So, Lee, welcome back. Hope you had a good weekend. How was the data feed for you?
I really admire you guys that have this much time, that you can do all this research. Obviously not working, running a household, planning 80th birthday parties.
Baking cakes.
Yeah. So, but I did have an interesting experience when I was doing my master's. So this wonderful esoteric master's in linguistics. And so to do a master's in linguistics doesn't necessarily, even though I was doing social linguistics, it was a research master's, so not, I wasn't doing first-hand research. I was researching what other people were saying about a particular topic. So you're bringing different thoughts together and hopefully creating some new ideas from the various options of research that was available. And I loved it. It was fascinating and so on. And it was completely useless. I did, my research was on the difference between, is there a difference between the speech between men and women? And there isn't. So just that's the short answer. But then the Department of Linguistics that I was working with said to me, Lee, we really loved what you did. Would you please consider doing a PhD? And I said to my husband, you know what? The more research I do, the more I realize that this person's research is based on that person's research is based on that person's research. It's a self-perpetuating cycle, and in fact is quite incestuous. That there's a small group of people, whether you're your little thing, your psychology or your linguistics or whatever, and you recycle each other's research. Hopefully maybe bringing in a new thought here and there, but I became quite cynical about the value of research for research's sake. And I felt it was a way for academics to perpetuate their own existence. So then what is, and then in terms of actual research, when I say actual research, when you are social experiments, for example, and you're trying to extract information about health or well-being, or you mentioned diversity, Edward. How do we know that leaders who embrace diversity, build better teams, and what other factors play into that? The more you dig into some of this research, unless it is that research is repeated in a number of different scenarios, just because it happens in a particular situation doesn't mean that it's now real or true. And so even research, you have to question, you have to think, it's there to inform, it's there to guide, it's there to prompt our own thinking. And I'm not saying we end up being the king of thinking, but it just means you can't, you can't take away your own responsibility. in bringing what your thinking is into the equation. So getting information, gathering data, getting research, but all helpful, all important, but be careful of over relying on it. So that's my thoughts.
Thanks, Lee. So, yeah, can we filter the data? You know, I think that's one of the things that interested me with you know, that approach of Ray Kurzweil in that documentary or that presentation of his that he did. You know, I looked at it and thought, well, you know, if he is right about at least about some of the things that he's forecasting for the future, and by 2048 we're going to have human brain computer interfaces that give us the ability to access so much more information and so much more data and at much higher speeds and all the rest of it. What's that going to do to our brains? Because I think some of us suffer from data overload already without direct interfaces between our brains and the internet. Now you're going to put a connection in there that allows you to tap into these things, or does it allow you, or does it control you? And what happens if you can't control it? You know, then I think probably Animal Farm becomes a reality. But because I think it'll probably turn us all into animals. But anyway, yeah, I think filtering is an absolute key element to dealing with data and dealing with inputs, and looking at, you know, who you listen to and who you follow, if you follow anybody. And my approach has always been to say, well, oh, somebody said something that was interesting, let me go and do a bit of research on it and then see how many different opinions I can find on it. If it really interests me that much, you know, I'll dig into it a bit. But I think the challenge with doing those kinds of things on the net these days is the algorithms that are running in the background on your searches and things like that. And you start getting presented with information that the algorithms believe align with your particular need or your particular desire to have a point of view. And that, in my opinion, becomes extremely dangerous, because now you have a narrowing perspective of something, and people can become fanatical, you know, and it's based on something that's been fed to you rather than something you believe you've researched it, you believe you've analyzed it, but actually it's been tailored. And so, you know, where do you get off this bus? I think that's the real danger in my mind, is we can get trapped into thinking this is reality, when in fact it's a perception that has been fed to us. And I must admit, you know, I don't dispute Ray Kurzweil's intellect and his past track record in terms of inventions and things like that. I can't dispute it. I don't know enough about the man. He certainly seems to have done some amazing things in his past. But I did feel that watching that was much of what he was presenting was coming from a very specific perspective, and that is you know, my perspective of an American opinion of the rest of the world. You know, as Ed said, it's very easy to make things correlate and make the data say what you want it to say. You know, statistics and damn lies, I think, is a famous quote. So yeah, I think one does have to be careful. One does have to be careful. Poof, you get your tongue around some of these things early Monday morning. Yeah, and I have researched Buckminster Fuller. I think he's a very interesting fellow, amongst a few others. Nikola Tesla, another one. So lots of very interesting people in our past. I'm sure there are going to be lots of very interesting people in our future. But my opinion is you've got to take things with a healthy dose of salt, and make up your own mind at the end of the day. Otherwise, we can get led down the garden path very, very rapidly. And Lee, as you well know, there's a huge difference between the language of men and women. I mean, just ask Mark Gungle. If you don't know who Mark Gungle is, go and watch a couple of his little talks about the spaghetti brain and the brain in boxes. And I think that'll convince you very quickly that there's a massive difference. But does it matter? I don't think it does. I think differences are what make us good. So, yes, Ed. No, you got to press the right button, Ed, not the left one.
That's it. That's better. Just something you said, Ivan, just really triggered off something for me. When you were mentioning about we get fed data depending on the algorithm, reminded me of a book I read quite some time ago. And it's called Burying the Typewriter. And it's about a girl growing up in Ceausescu, Romania. And Ceausescu controlled the sale of typewriters so that people couldn't put out messages different from him. And all typewriters had a serial number and they knew who they sold the typewriter to. So I think it just goes to show, that even back then, which was probably the 70s, 80s, I think, maybe, people were trying to control the flow of information. And I think you're right, these algorithms do control the flow of information, and there's a reason why they do it. Ceausescu's was pretty blatant, but I think these algorithms are very subtle and dangerous. Yeah. It always makes me think of the Cambridge Analytica story as well. So, and I popped in that other one. I don't know if you haven't watched the Filter Bubbles TED Talk. It's an interesting watch too. So, where to from here? Any thoughts on the topic? So, based on the data, yeah.
Well, I was quite struck with this idea: what is more powerful, fact or fiction? And so let's talk about that tomorrow. Is that okay?
Yeah, that sounds good. So yeah, is your fact my fiction? Which is more powerful? I don't know. So have a factually fictional day, and we'll see you on tomorrow. Have a good one. Cheers, folks.